We all know Moses, who is known for leading the Israelites out of Egypt and delivering the Ten Commandments. Let us look at some incidents that point to Jesus to understand how much the Old Testament points to the New. Moses said, "The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him." This is often seen as a direct prophecy to Jesus, who would be a mediator between God and humanity, just as Moses was. Then the Passover lamb, while Moses didn't explicitly say the Passover lamb was a type of the Messiah, the parallels are evident. The lamb was to be without defect, and its blood protected the Israelites from death. Jesus, often called the Lamb of God by John, who is without sin and whose sacrifice protects believers from spiritual death. Moses made a bronze serpent to heal those bitten by venomous snakes. Jesus directly compares this event to himself, indicating that just as the Israelites looked to the bronze serpent for healing, people would look to him on the cross for salvation. Then the manna from heaven. Moses pointed out that God provided the manna in wilderness. Jesus draws a parallel between the manna and himself in John 6, calling himself the bread of life that came down from heaven. Then the rock in the desert. In Exodus 17, Moses struck a rock, and water flowed out to quench the thirst of the Israelites. In his letter to the Corinthians, Paul identifies this rock as Christ, suggesting a typological connection between the rock Moses struck and Jesus, the living water. The Jewish leaders prided themselves on their adherence to the Mosaic law, viewing Moses as their advocate. But Jesus flips this idea, suggesting that Moses, in whom they have placed their trust, will stand as their accuser. This is not because Moses is against them, but because they have missed the heart of his writings. What Moses wrote pointed to him. Jesus asks, "But since you do not believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I say?" If the Jewish leaders cannot believe the writings of Moses, which they have studied and revered, how can they believe the words of Jesus, whom they view with suspicion? Moses indirectly tells about Jesus, "For the works that the Father has given me to finish, the very works that I am doing, testify that Father has sent me, and the Father who sent me has himself testified concerning me. You have never heard his voice, nor seen his form, nor does his word dwell in you, for you do not believe the one he sent." Because God had an answer for Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you ought to say to the Israelites. I am as sent me to you." In response to Moses' concern, God revealed himself Don't worry that you don't have the answers. Moses prophesied of a future great prophet when he wrote, "The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken." A few verses later, Moses informs us that God would put words in mouth, and he shall speak unto them all, shall command him. Matthew signals that he saw Jesus as this promised prophet in his infancy narrative by pointing out similarities in birth stories of these two deliverers. Both Jesus and Moses had unusual infancies and childhoods. Both were born into poor families who were part of a conquered people. Both were spared from infanticide, while most around them were not. Both were raised by a stepfather. In an inverse connection, Moses was born as a slave and became a prince in the royal house of the king. Jesus was born King of the Jews, but became the ultimate servant, and as a child was visited by the kingly Magi in his humble house. Neither Jesus nor Moses seemed to have a permanent settled home in their own land. When Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. This statement could be interpreted by seeing Israel collectively as the son that was called out of Egypt, thus a statement that spoke to Israel's past experiences. Matthew ends his gospel by saying, "For those of us who believe in him, keep his commandments, and trust in his promises, he is ever with us." Matthew's ending is a fitting conclusion to his monumental witnesses of Jesus Christ as Emmanuel, or God with us. "Go ye therefore and teach all nations and believe in the Almighty."